What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The Celestial Compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Biehl. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Biehl.
Greetings, Earthlings. Welcome to Celestial Compass. I'm Kathy Biehl of EmpowermentUnlimited.net. And to start off our show, I just want to update the forecast for the month a tiny bit. You can find the full forecast at my site, EmpowermentUnlimited.net, and also at OMTimes.com. You may have noticed the energy feels a little different already this month. We have influences that are inspiring us to be much more energetic and gregarious, outgoing, and maybe a little attention-seeking. Venus, the social director of the skies, has moved into fun-loving, look-at-me Leo, where Mars, the ruler of our drive and cosmic first responder, has already been for a few days. So there's this unity of, like the song Life is a Cabaret is playing in the background for everybody or for a lot of people, but it doesn't mean that we're just going to be frivolous at all. There is some really important action occurring all month, moving forward on a lot of things that were shaken up, ripped up, moved into different form by the lunar eclipse in May and the lunar eclipse in November, if you can think back that far. And we have two really big outer planet shifts also occurring this month. Pluto, which has been standing on the doorway to the future, aka the first degree of the sign of Aquarius, since the end of March, stations retrograde on the 11th and very slowly begins to scooch away from the doorway. And we'll begin to see a revisiting of the big collective and personal issues that have been jostled, the coming attractions trailer that we've all been living through. Additionally, Saturn, the planet of adulting, planet of accountability and responsibility and structure, is stationing retrograde later in the month on the 17th. It moved into Pisces at the beginning of March and is putting us through themes, issues, circumstances that harken back to the mid-90s, the last time he was there, and we'll be getting massive opportunity to revisit how we've been using our energy, how much of an adult we've been, how responsible we've been, and whether we have adequately committed to the area of life that Saturn has been stirring up. I am preparing a video on Saturn in Pisces that'll be available later this week, and so by my next show, I will have instructions for you for how you can get it. But today, we're talking about something that is somewhat Saturnian, but also actually fun. My guest today is astrologer Claudia Trivelas, and we're talking about her new book, The Astrology Guide, Understanding Your Signs, Your Gifts, and Yourself. I've read the book, and it puts the pieces together as it explains them, which not every guide does. It gives a gift and a shadow for each planet, sign, house placement, and combination of planets, and also a few other unconventional and interesting things that we'll talk about. Claudia provides an eclectic synthesis of a broad body of knowledge from many spiritual, esoteric, and metaphysical traditions. She was mentored by such astrology luminaries as Isabel Hickey and Charles Emerson, who was a cosmobiologist and founder of the Uranian Society. You can find her new moon and full moon updates on social media and at her site, astrorebalancing.com. Welcome, Claudia.
Hi, Kathy. So nice to be here.
I'm so glad. I'd like to start by asking people their astrology origin story. How did you come to astrology? Because it sounds like yours is a little more monumental than some of ours.
Well, it's interesting. And as I said to you for the brief moment we had before the show started, that we had a few things in common. One of them, as I was reading in your about information, that you became interested in astrology in junior high school. And that's, that's the same story for myself. I used to ride my bike to Woolworths, if anyone remembers that store that used to have astrology magazines, and I was totally fascinated by them. And I would sit there and read as much as I could and use my allowance from babysitting to buy as many of the magazines as I could. And so it went on from there.
And well, all right. It ended up going to some pretty important places. So you read on your own for a while, and then how did it come about that you started? How did you start actually? Did you formally study?
Yes, I formally studied with Isabel Hickey. I was in Boston at the time, and it was always as if things fell together. I lived in Cambridge, Mass at the time, and had friends that were also interested in astrology, who were also studying with Isabel Hickey, and it was like a pod. And there's nothing like having close friends that know the same language as you do, and who's also studying astrology. So this included such well-known astrologers as Catherine Merlin, who has done the column for Time and Country for many years, and Howard Seth Fortis, who has written several books on astrology, and the late Howard Seth Fortis, I should say, and Darby Costello, to name a few of us who studied with Isabel Hickey at that time in the early 70s in Boston.
And for younger listeners who may not understand the importance of what you have just said, can you talk about the stature that Isabel Hickey had?
Well, there wasn't a whole lot. There were a couple of people in the Boston area. There was another woman named Betty, and I wish I could remember her last name, that I initially studied with for a short amount of time. But, astrology wasn't as popular as it is these days. So it was very auspicious to be in an environment in a city where you could actually study with someone. Isabel had, written about astrology, and she was quite well known in astrology circles. So she was a very knowledgeable teacher, and really taught astrology from not only the practical, detailed perspective that is involved in learning astrology, but she also brought in a more spiritual overview of the study of astrology in terms of it talking about, so to speak, a blueprint of the person's soul. So that resonated to me, that concept. And, and again, having close friends that lived nearby who also knew the language of astrology just, continually reinforced learning the craft of astrology.
That was my, not quite that extreme, but I got to know a lot of the people in my initial classes when I was studying, and one of them became my bookkeeper, and I cannot tell you what a bizarre and wonderful experience it is having someone handle your books who's also conversant in astrology. That was always very fun. Um,
Because it is a
and then,
language, you
yes,
know.
yes, you can speak a language. There's an ease.
Hmm.
There's definitely an ease that happens with it.
Hmm.
And how did Charles Emerson come into the picture?
Well, after when I moved from the Boston area to New York City, and that's where I came across Charles Emerson. I was interested in the concept of Uranian astrology. Actually, before that, the concept of midpoints, Eberton's system of astrology
Hmm.
and cosmobiology, and that led me to Charles Emerson, and I studied with him for probably 5 or 6 years basically on a weekly basis.
And it sounds like working with both of these individuals definitely um, pointed you in a direction that fits what you're doing now. Um, you call or you offer astro rebalancing. Can you talk about that?
Yes, actually, I have two domain names that point to my website. Astro Rebalancing is the original one, but also, excuse me, I call my brand Discover Your Imprint. And I feel it's very important for people to understand all aspects of themselves, especially as society has evolved in many ways. And some of the shadow sides of the evolution of society is that it does seem to like to put people into categories and has a lot of judgments as to, what are acceptable qualities, what are unacceptable qualities, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so I think that it's important for people to really have a sense of who they are as a unique individual and what they offer, what the gifts are that they have to offer. For example, sometimes some people just aren't social. They're more hermetic. They prefer to spend more time to themselves. They may be more introverted, etc. So there can be situations where that may not be looked upon as a positive quality, where it's where being socially acceptable and having more social ease is considered to be more desirable. But yet, everybody is different, and everyone has their own gifts. So I feel that astrology can help someone to understand really who they are, which ultimately is self-empowering.
And that certainly
Oh,
sounds, yes, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and there's many other traits as well that people may not may not fall into a category as being most desirable. I know it gives people a lot of it helps them to understand that they may be someone who is more introverted, and that's just who they are.
And this sounds
So
very much like it's pointing toward what you put in your book, actually.
yeah.
Sounds very, very consistent and conversant with that. What inspired you to write the astrology guide? Is it something that you've had kicking around the back of your mind for a number of years? Did someone say you really should write a book? How did it come about?
A combination, actually, of both of those things. Yeah, certainly it was kicking around for a long time. I've, studied many, not just astrology, but also aspects of human design. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. And
Yes,
which
but
is based,
feel free to explain it if you wish.
which is based on astrology, but also brings into play the chakra system and the I Ching, the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. So it is a body graph, as it's called, for human design, is based upon the date, time, and place of birth. And it uses the positions of the planets. And I felt that also this adds to someone's understanding of who they are. So basically, many of the studies that help people to understand themselves, and I guess part of that was also my quest to understand myself, which all these various studies and tools have been helpful in doing. So in terms of, initially I wanted to, write a broader book about astrology that included all the basics, but also went into more the human design study. But I realized that would just be such a huge book that was, not possible at this point, because each hexagram of the I Ching corresponds to certain degrees of the zodiac.
Right.
And what's interesting about the I Ching is that there's 64 different hexagrams, and 64 is a number that we frequently come across in sacred geometry, and that's connected to our own genetic structure and various other aspects of where sacred geometry applies. So I feel that it broadens the view of astrology and also supports astrology. Mm-hmm. So that started to bring into play where I started appreciating more the diversity and the uniqueness of each individual, and looking at the various planetary combinations and the various placements of the planets as not being good or bad, but seeing it as in a broader concept.
And that mm-hmm. reminds me of, or I want to point out to people, that one way that your guide really distinguishes itself from many of the astrology guides still being published every year is that you do not present information in a vacuum from like hitting the ground running. You are synthesizing things, which is actually really tricky to do. But that sounds like, it's obviously a very deliberate editorial choice.
Yes. Well, it is a synthesis if you think about it. Our lives and ourselves, our souls, we are a synthesis. And to really be able to understand that, especially in this evolving, world that we're in. But I also felt that since there's so much shifting and so much, moving into more of a quantum space, that astrology needed to be brought into that quantum space. And to me, part of that is, really looking at things more in a sliding scale rather than in black and white terms.
Which then explains or leads to the fact that you give the gift and the shadow for pretty much every entry, except maybe the description of aspects. Hitting the ground running, every single thing is put in that framework.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right, because it's a moving, evolving process. Mm-hmm. And I know the way I learned astrology was, you take classes, you read books, you read magazines, etc. Of course, now you have the luxury of listening to podcasts and, searching the internet to get information. But ultimately what happens, or what always happened to me, and I think many people I know, is that it becomes a contemplation process. And I think the contemplation process is very important because we sit with what we've learned and we digest what it is that we've learned, and we personalize it, and we think about it. So my goal with this astrology guide was to have it be something that was more of a contemplative, or that fit into that contemplative process. Because I really believe that's how one learns astrology. You know, it takes years you can learn astrology, many of the facts of astrology and many of the details, but to really get the big picture when you're reading someone's chart, where you have to look at the gestalt of that chart and how what's important to that person, does become or evolve out of really having internalized the nature of various combinations of planets and how they intersect. And, there's a lot of variables that have to be taken into account. The planet itself, where it's located, what house it's in, and the combination of energies that are affecting it.
And for people who haven't read the book yet, I will explain that includes, at the outset, every time a particular body is introduced, for example, the sun or the moon, it is also described in combination with everything else, so that you can just go through and see all the pairings that are possible. And every single entry has a gift and a shadow, which it really just helps people put it together quite well, I think. Now, just tiny detour here for a second. There is early on, you actually define and describe pretty much every possible aspect, which is very technical and very detailed for a guide. What was the thinking behind that? I mean, I look at it as, if someone throws a word at me I have not run across because it's a minor aspect I don't use, I now know where I'm going to look it up.
Well, I think was really what was behind it. To understand that things, the planets can combine in various ways. Some of them are more direct. Like, for instance, a square, two planets combine in a square aspect. What does that mean? It's sort of like trying to see around a corner, right? What's coming. Or if it's in a trine aspect, it's sort of in front of you, not really, but it's close, it's in your peripheral vision. So to give a sense of, sometimes the energies connect, but they take you a while to really figure out what's happening with it.
I also noticed, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, but the fact that they connect is what's important.
Right, and you automatically introduce the reader to the notion that there are a multiplicity of ways that these different influences connect in one chart or another. Now, you include some factors that are not commonly they're not commonly thrown into a book like this. You include Chiron and the role of the nodes in combination with everything, and also Eris. So what was the thinking behind each of these?
Well, the nodes, I feel, are very important because, as we become more universal in our evolution, really, it does bring in the nodes to an even greater extent. I mean, they were always, very important, even in the ancient, Vedic astrology, known as Jyotish. The nodes have always been important since they involve intersecting points of access. They're not actual planets, but they're points, and they're more universals in a sense. Or, they're not just linear of one planet going around the orbit of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do feel the nodes are very important, especially in identifying where we've come from, what are some of our patterns that are familiar to us, and how we can use those in moving forward with what we need to do here, in this incarnation. So to me, the nodes point to the line, where we want to direct our energy for maximum growth and fulfillment.
And Chiron is a body that has been increasingly brought into the conversation in the last few decades. Can you talk about Chiron?
I just feel that Chiron is so important because we are evolving at such a fast rate. In fact, I just wrote, in terms of, I write about each new moon and full moon on social media, and I was just writing about the full moon in Sagittarius a few days ago. And, what came to mind is like, what is your new normal? Because Sagittarius is shooting its arrow out there, into the universe. But, how much things have changed and shifted even in the last, 4 years.
Oh, yes.
So Chiron involves some of the processes that we need to look at in terms of our own, what we're bringing to the table. What are some of these patterns? What are some of the genetic patterning that we've come in with? What is it that we need to really take a deep look at in order to, feel more, in order to be more self-empowered to move forward.
And right here, we're going to take our break. So hang on, everyone. We'll be back in a few minutes to talk more.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time landing
a job and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking today with Claudia Trivelas, the author of The Astrology Guide, Understanding Your Signs, Your Gifts, and Yourself. And right before the break, we were talking about the role of Chiron, which is actually included in Claudia's book. So in the book, you're talking about Chiron in the birth chart and not Chiron where it is in the sky right now, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And I honestly, when I was in astrology school and for the first couple of decades of taking classes, this was not a body that was talked about. And then suddenly books started appearing, and now it's a feature, front and centered player, dwarf planet that it is. It's getting lots of attention.
It is getting lots of attention. Maybe because it was just, it's been in Aries for a while.
Right. Driving its bulldozer over everybody.
Right.
And speaking of something that's been in Aries, you also mentioned Eris, Eris, not Os, which is often the short form description of that is the goddess of discord. How do you view Eris, and why'd you put her in the book?
Well, because I feel that as these dwarf planets have been discovered, that they really represent a new levels of consciousness that are being introduced to the planet. And as we absorb them and understand their meaning, I feel it contributes to our self-awareness in a key way.
Eris is also, it's like the feminine claiming her due, like, you will notice me. I'm a little bit angry. Pay attention.
And I know that originally it was called, well, some of these new dwarf planets are really bringing in more of the feminine energy, I feel, as happened with the introduction of the standard asteroids, Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta. And so what I really appreciate about them is that it's not so aligned to the typical descriptions, the classical descriptions of the myths that the original planets, have become known for. Mm-hmm. So Eris is interesting because it was called, or is called, or can be called, the goddess of discord. And I've done more research on that, primarily because it is conjunct my moon in the 9th house in my chart.
Okay.
So I felt that intuitively I had a certain grasp of it. So I've also studied with Alan Clay, not extensively, but I've listened to some of his videos, etc., on the dwarf planets. But so he looks at it as, well, Eris is known as the sister of Mars in traditional mythology, but he introduces it as the higher octave of Pluto.
I have heard that. Okay.
Yeah, I was just listening to that actually fairly recently, which is interesting because as the new planets were discovered, talking about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, those were first introduced as being, higher octaves, like Uranus being the higher octave of Mercury, Neptune being the higher octave of Venus, and Pluto being the higher octave of Mars. So if you think of Eris as the higher octave of Pluto and how significant that is in this time of great change. So I like to look at Eris as a goddess that's really concerned with authenticity. And if you think of authenticity as a concept right now, I think that's, I think it really holds its place as, part of our evolutionary growth and development.
That is not, I have not heard that concept before, and it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something to, all of these dwarf planets are, somewhat difficult to talk about simply because they haven't been around long enough, Like
right,
Sedna is another one that's interesting. And of course, the orb of Sedna is, I don't know, something ridiculous, like 20,000 years, 2 years, I can't even remember. But it's hard to know when that was previously where it is now. But what's important about Sedna is, it's about to change signs, which is going to be maybe it's 11,000 years. I'm sorry, I don't have those facts in my head at the moment. But, if you think about that as an energy shift that's been going on for a very long time, the orbs of the other dwarf planets are more in alignment with Pluto, which is like 256 years.
Right.
So, they're more between 200 and 300 years. Sedna is different. And again, it's an interesting myth. I mention a little bit about it, not very much because, I'm still absorbing it myself. Mm-hmm. Actually, it takes 12,000 years. So I'm looking in my book.
So we can't exactly look at what happened the last time she was where she was.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, still a body of work to be developed on her. But you do mention several of the dwarf planets that are now coming more and more into, as I said, the conversation. So someone reading this book, especially if they're a newcomer to astrology, will have an immediate familiarity with where research is heading.
Exactly. And also gives new astrologers something to contemplate.
Right.
How does that resonate to them? Yeah, Sedna is about to move into Gemini in 2024. So for 12,000 years, it's been in Taurus. So, what does that mean? And you can say, well, it's not close enough that it's really going to matter. Or, does it matter? What are some of these shifts or cycles that we see? Because astrology really are, you're talking about various cycles of time, an intersection of cycles of time.
And you mentioned, you also have a chapter on the original asteroids. You've already alluded to them: Sirius, Juno, Vesta, Pallas Athena. They're all feminine energies, feminine goddesses. And your rationale for including them in this guide was
that we're, ultimately I feel it's important to balance the masculine and the feminine energies. And so we've been under the influence, as we are seeing, is being pointed out with Pluto having been in Capricorn and, getting ready to move back into Capricorn for its next to the last stint there. A certain kind of energy that's about to shift. As Pluto moves into Aquarius. So, in other words, rather than a very top-down energy, which is how I look at the Pluto and Capricorn energy, a more authoritative top-down. moving into a more, an energy that's more, that pays equal homage to each person's unique gifts with the Aquarian energy.
Much more of a grassroots or a collective, or people banding together with what's right around them. Yeah, I look at like local farmers markets, even though they've existed for a long, long time. Farmers markets and community gardens, to me, are one expression of this, or an example of it, even though, again, they've existed for a long time. But it's not like some government said, you will do this. It's a bunch of people saying, we will do this.
Yes. And I think it will be interesting to look at the rising of more grassroots kinds of configurations, really. And see, watch that over the next 20 years with Pluto in Aquarius.
Pluto in Aquarius moving its way across all of the charts of the baby boomers. Killing them off one by one. Oh, I didn't say that. Forcing radical transformation one by one. There we go. That's a better way of putting it.
Right. Forcing certain shadows to, appear to, because don't forget the gift lies in the shadow. So the shadow energy is what makes us uncomfortable. So by looking at what those uncomfortable feelings are, and by working with that discomfort to eliminate the discomfort, is the gift that is found in each of the shadows, which is important for self-awareness and self-growth. So whether it's a shadow with a combination of energy that's in the person's birth chart, where they find a constant kind of, tightening when it raises its head, and with the evolutionary thrust that we're in now with the planetary energies for growth, to be able to really get into that feeling and look at it and see where it's coming from, one can really find the gift of empowerment. It doesn't mean that everything goes away. It's a matter of just knowing and being able to even look at certain energies and, as it comes up, and identify it for what it is and know that you can move through it.
So when somebody reads a book like this, anything that is astrological, my experience has been that people immediately gravitate toward, what about me? All the parts that are about the person, the individual reading the book. And it seems to me that reading this book, someone's going to start to come across recurring themes really easily, reading the different combinations, because if a chart says something once, it usually says it 5 times or more. So if you read this, it seems to me that you will almost subliminally start to see yourself in a much more rounded way than somebody saying, well, if you have Venus and Virgo, this is how you act. Like, no. It's a lot more than that. So there's Gestalt's a good word for this. This book actually delivers a multifaceted understanding of the self if you actually just read it. And if you play the little game of, well, I'm just going to look up my stuff, you're going to get a pretty broad and comprehensive picture of who you are, which sounds to me was your goal for this book.
Yes. And for something, it's a book that somebody can come back to, because the more you look at the same thing, the more you interpret it in a different way, or it adds more depth to the interpretation because you've had certain experiences. If you're reading about a particular aspect, whatever that might be, let's say Mars, Venus, and how that combination can work if you understand what the gift of having that combination of energies is, but also see what the shadow side of that is, the integration of those aspects of the personality. Then, it's like peeling off layers of understanding of maybe how one interacts in relationships.
And possibly even reframing the way you think about yourself.
Right.
Which could be very, very useful, because the words that people attach to themselves have a really powerful defining impact. So if you start opening yourself to a broader library of labels for yourself or characteristics, it will actually, I think, filter into what you're letting people see about yourself and will change your relationship with yourself.
Right. And that's the whole point of it.
Well, there we go.
Because through changing your relationship to yourself, one becomes, more self-empowered. Because if you know who you are, right? If you know the truth of who you are, as can be told by anything that's an imprint, astrology chart being an imprint, a blueprint of who you are, in this incarnation. And if there's a certain truth to who you are, if you know the truth of who you are, then you're not flat, you're not so easily influenced by outside influences. You can hold your own.
You hold your center better. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a bit of a community service aspect to this book as well. It sounds to me.
I suppose. The Aquarian side.
Well, and it's not. Yes, it's wonderful. People can get sessions with you. You do see clients, but this will get your approach in the hands of people who may never have the opportunity to have a conversation directly with you. So you've put this all. It's kind of like, I don't know if you remember Outer Limits, a TV show from the 60s, but there was one episode where for some reason there were these bizarre alien creatures that were in gigantic bell jars full of water. And they were away from their planet, and their planet was about to be destroyed, and so they were transmitting all of their knowledge to some human laboratory so it could be saved when their planet was destroyed. Now, why they were on Earth, it didn't stay in my head, but I always had this image of frantically sending knowledge out so that others can have it in case you're not there anymore. And so that I see that as one thing going on with this book. So it sounds to me, in a sense, like you have memorialized your astrology career in this book.
That's true.
Yeah. Very nice. So, talking about what it is what kinds of work do you do with people? I mean, this is the approach you take. If someone were to have a session with you, you would help guide them through or get them to a similar endpoint, but quicker.
Yeah, well, I feel that, my goal in a session is to help people understand themselves, so that then when we look at what's going on, planetarily affecting them, then they are more self-empowered and able to move through those challenges, and also to take advantage of opportunities that come their way. So it's helping them come from a place of strength, so that whatever is happening in their charts, in terms of planetary transits, or life situations, help them to maximize their experience.
So, a couple more questions. Do you think you might have a book on human design in you, or that's just the stuff that you didn't put in the astrology guide?
I think there's something there. I've also, human design has another component to it. It's called the gene keys, which, something that Richard Rudd had, who had worked with the founder of human design, but then also had various cognitions that, incorporated a broader stroke of human design, I should say, which he also stresses is a contemplative study in terms of self-awareness and self-empowerment. And what's interesting is that he also uses the concept of the gift and the shadow of each of the 64 gene keys, which are comparable to the 64 I Ching hexagrams. And again, the gene key profile is based on the date, time, and place of birth. So, it has a foundation, an astrology foundation to it. So, he has been an influence as well in terms of his approach for understanding oneself. Again, that bottom up, the inner out type of learning in a more contemplative way, instead of having to, just memorize a bunch of different pieces of information that aren't really put together and internalized. There's a combination of both, the right brain and the left brain. That's important in terms of whether it's astrology or human design or, any of the ancient and modern sciences. But I think it's important now to, recognize the importance of the contemplative side and the gestalt, finding the gestalt.
Well, I would say that the time of Saturn in Capricorn and Aquarius definitely moved us into a much more contemplative way of being, or at least made us start becoming aware of what our real priorities are. And I've certainly observed big changes in a whole lot of people in that regard. So this would fit with it very, very well. People might be much more open to this approach than they would have been before, when it was just, oh, this is cool, I want to learn something that's fun. Now we're learning something that's really useful.
Right. Yeah, because astrology is such a wonderful tool. For growth and evolution.
And it's not just funny little videos on TikTok. Sorry, folks, I'm being judgmental.
It can be that too, right?
It can be fun.
Yeah, you can enjoy the funny little videos, and there are pieces of information, that there's facts, and but there's both. It's a study, inner and outer type of study, right brain, left brain study.
Much more balanced, male, female balanced, receptive, passive, active balance, all of that. Is there anything you're working on right now?
No, the book just really launched about, less than 2 months ago. So I'm basking in the launch, so to speak.
Nice. Very good.
And enjoying speaking about it. And, I would like to, do more of the blending, the gene keys, the human design, and the astrology.
And where can people find you? What's your website, and where are you on social media?
Okay, so my website is astrorebalancing.com, or you can get there with discoveryourimprint.com. On Facebook, I know. I have two ways of doing everything, probably because I'm a Gemini, right? So on social media, you can search by my name, Claudia Trivelas, but also my page is Discover Your Imprint. And on Instagram, I'm Astrology by Goddess Isis.
By Goddess Isis. Okay, well, thank you very much. I have enjoyed talking with you. I wish you great success with your book, and I look forward to seeing how you continue to synthesize all of this. And if I'm in your neck of the woods, you will be hearing from me. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you, Kathy. A pleasure.
And everybody, you can find me and my forecasts at OMTimes.com and also at empowermentunlimited.net if you prefer to listen. On YouTube, the Professional Aquarian channel. And I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Be safe. Bye.